The root smells like wet dog and old iron. You pull it from the ground in November, hands already cracked from the cold, and the smell hits you before the root even clears the soil.
This is it.
That is valerian. Valeriana officinalis. And if you think it is going to smell like the capsules in a health food shop, you have never actually grown it, never dug it at the right time, never held the real thing in your bare hands in a muddy medieval kitchen garden. This is not a list. A list is what someone writes when they have read other lists. What follows is a working knowledge of 20 plants that kept people alive, kept fevers manageable, kept infected wounds from turning a man's arm black before the harvest was even in. These are plants grown in a physics garden, scratched into the southern side of a wattle fence, untended at dawn before the animals were even fed, because the animals could wait one more hour and a dying child could not. Start with what you could grow in the worst soil, because the worst soil was what most people had. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, is the first plant any serious homesteader needed to know. Not because it is remarkable to look at. It is not. It grows in compacted, trampled ground, in the path between the pigsty and the grain store, in soil that has been walked on by hobnailed boots for 200 years. Modern herbalism tends to describe yarrow as a gentle tonic. Anyone who has actually packed a fresh yarrow poultice into a deep cut, however, and watched the bleeding slow within minutes, knows that gentle is not the right word. The chemistry is the point. The plant contains achillitin and achilline, compounds that actively promote platelet aggregation. The medieval peasant did not know those words, but he knew the plant worked, and he grew it because in a world where a scythe could open your shin to the bone in a single careless stroke, a plant that stopped bleeding was not a luxury. It was survival infrastructure. Walk further into the garden. Marshmallow, Althea officinalis, grew near the water butt, near anywhere the soil stayed damp longer than it should. The roots, dug in autumn of the plant's second year, were what mattered. Not the leaves, not the flowers, though the flowers were eaten when food was scarce. The roots, boiled low and slow until the water thickened into something resembling a thin paste, produced a mucilage so dense and coating that it could soothe an inflamed throat, a raw gut, the burning passage of a urinary infection. Modern books claim the marshmallow plant was used primarily as a confection. Anyone who has ever nursed a child through a chest infection in a damp stone cottage with no fuel to waste on steam inhalations knows that the root decoction was medicine first and sweetness second, and the sweetness was only useful because it made the child drink it without a fight. Comfrey grew at the corner of the garden where the night soil was composted. Symphytum officinale. It grew there because comfrey is greedy, a deep-rooted, nitrogen-hungry plant that will take everything you give it and still reach further down. It also contains allantoin, a compound that genuinely accelerates cell proliferation, that actually speeds the knitting of soft tissue. A poultice of bruised comfrey leaf around a sprained ankle was not folklore. It was applied biochemistry, arrived at through 10,000 seasons of paying attention. The root, when boiled until the liquid becomes gelatinous, was used to immobilize fractures before anything resembling a rigid splint was to hand. You can feel the logic in it when you hold the root. It is almost rubbery when fresh, fibrous, and dense, and when you boil it, the whole thing softens and swells, and the liquid thickens in a way that makes sense to your hands, even before your mind has caught up. Here is the reality of growing medicinal plants in a medieval context. You did not grow them because you were interested in herbalism. You grew them because the nearest thing resembling a trained physician was a day's walk away and would not come to your farm for anything short of a substantial payment you did not have. The garden was not a hobby. It was a first response unit. It was the only thing standing between a common infection and a death that would leave your family one working body short going into winter. Elderberry, Sambucus nigra, was not grown in the physic garden. It grew on the margin, on the edge of the property, near the midden heap. Because elder is opportunistic and spreads where the soil is disturbed and rich. The berries, picked in September when they hang in heavy, dark, drooping clusters, were cooked always, cooked hard. Because the raw berry contains sambunegrin, a cyanogenic glycoside that will make you spectacularly unwell. Modern raw food advocates who suggest eating elderberries straight from the bush should actually try it. Heat breaks the compound down. The cooked syrup, reduced with honey until it is almost too thick to pour, was the standard treatment for anything presenting with a fever, a sore throat, the deep bone ache of influenza. The antiviral flavonoids in elder are real. This is not magical thinking dressed up as medicine. This is a plant that was empirically validated across centuries of use in exactly the conditions where it needed to work. St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum, was picked in midsummer around the feast of St. John, and that timing was not religious coincidence. The plant's hypericin content peaks when the flowers are just opening, at the height of June. Like and the medieval understanding that you harvested it at a specific festival moment was a practical observation encoded in religious language, because religious language was the only language the community shared reliably. The oil, made by bruising the flowers and macerating them in fat for several weeks in a south-facing window, turned a deep, almost blood-red color as the hypericin transferred into the base. That red oil rubbed into nerve pain, into the burning ache of what we would now call neuralgia, into wounds that seemed slow to heal, produced measurable relief. Modern clinical trials confirm this. The medieval body experienced it directly, without the clinical trial, and kept growing the plant because the plant kept working. Feverfew, Tanacetum parthenium, is a bitter, sharp-smelling plant that no animal will eat voluntarily. That bitterness is the point. The sesquiterpene lactones, parthenolide in particular, inhibit the release of serotonin and prostaglandins that trigger the vascular cascade behind a migraine. The medieval herbalist did not know this. She knew that 3 leaves of feverfew eaten fresh every morning, through spring and into summer, kept the hammer blow headaches from coming. She knew it because her mother had told her, and her mother's mother had told her. And the chain of that knowledge was as solid as any chain you could forge in iron. More solid, probably, because knowledge passed through pain is not easily forgotten.
The heart of our kitchen is
Garlic.
defined by the incredible bounty of
Allium
garlic
sativum.
hanging from
You
every
is on
crack.
this list, and anyone who wants to argue about whether garlic belongs in a medicinal context rather than a culinary one has never tried to keep wounds clean without access to anything resembling a disinfectant. Allicin, produced when garlic is crushed, is a broad-spectrum antimicrobial of genuine potency. It is not as reliable as a modern antibiotic. Nothing available in 1250 was. But a garlic poultice on a festering wound, a broth heavy with garlic fed to someone with a lung infection, was not superstition. It was the best available intervention, and the fact that it had a measurable effect is why people kept using it across every culture that had access to the plant. Thyme grew in the sunniest, driest corner of the physics garden, in almost no soil at all, because Thymoemus vulgaris prefers neglect and heat to attention and richness. The volatile oil, thymol, is a proven antiseptic. When thyme was boiled in water and the steam directed into a child's face through a cloth tent, it was delivering an antiseptic vapor directly to an inflamed respiratory tract. The technique worked. Not as well as modern nebulized medication, but in a world where modern nebulized medication did not exist, it worked enough. It worked often enough that every physics garden in Northern Europe had thyme in it, and the position of that thyme patch, warm, dry, south-facing, tells you something about how carefully the people tending these gardens actually observed what their plants needed. Plantain, Plantago major, grew in the path, in the most trampled ground imaginable. The only plant stubborn enough to survive where the cartwheels ran every day. The broad-leaved plantain, the one that grows flat against the ground as if it is trying to avoid being noticed, produces aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory effect. A bruised plantain leaf applied to an insect sting, a nettle rash, a superficial wound, reduced swelling. The leaf was there, underfoot, free, always available, and the chemical mechanism was as real as anything you might rub out of a tube purchased in a pharmacy. The trick was in knowing to look down, to look at the thing you were walking on, and to understand that useful medicine does not announce itself. Lavender, Lavandula angustifolia, did not grow everywhere in medieval Europe. Let that be clear. In a climate like southern England, in a sheltered kitchen garden, against a south-facing wall, it could be coaxed into surviving. The linalool in lavender oil has demonstrable anxiolytic and mild sedative properties. It also has genuine antiseptic characteristics. The infused oil, rubbed on a wound after cleansing, on the brow of a fever patient, into the temples of someone who could not stop shaking with exhaustion and fear at the end of a hard season, was doing real chemical work. Not magic, chemistry. The medieval boundary between those two things was less clear than ours, but the plant's effect was independent of whatever framework the user applied to it. Wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, was grown with caution because it deserved caution. The thojone it contains is toxic in high doses, but in small, precise doses, wormwood was the standard treatment for intestinal parasites. And intestinal parasites were not a minor inconvenience in a world where people lived alongside their animals and drank water from sources they could not test. A small infusion of wormwood, bitter enough to make the eyes water, drunk on an empty stomach for 3 consecutive days, would clear roundworm and pinworm with a reliability that had nothing to do with belief and everything to do with the compound's direct toxicity to the parasite's nervous systems. Lungwort, Pulmonaria officinalis, was named for the doctrine of signatures, the idea that a plant's appearance indicated its medicinal use, its spotted leaves supposedly resembling diseased lung tissue. Modern skeptics enjoy dismissing this. Here is the reality. The doctrine of signatures was often nonsense, but lungwort actually does have documented mucilaginous, what expectorant properties. The allantoin content, again, the same compound as in comfrey, the silica content, the saponins, all of these contribute to a genuine action on the respiratory tract. The naming rationale was wrong. The observed effect was right. The empirical observation survived the bad theory, which is more than can be said for a good deal of intellectual history. Borage, Borago officinalis, grew easily, self-seeded aggressively, and produced its brilliant blue flowers from June into September, long enough to be useful across most of the season. The flowers were eaten. The leaves were made into infusions. The seed oil, unavailable to medieval herbalists in the form we now know it, was not the point. The point was that borage had a documented diuretic effect, that it was used to bring fevers to a productive sweat, and that it contained GLA, gamma-linolenic acid, an anti-inflammatory fatty acid available in the leaf in small quantities. Not a miracle plant, a useful plant, one that grew without complaint and gave back more than it asked for, which was the highest praise available in a medieval physics garden. Hops, Humulus lupulus, were not only for beer. The female flower heads, the strobiles, dried and sewn into a pillow, have a genuine sedative effect through the compound 2-methyl-3-butan-2-OL, a dimethylcarbinol produced as the hops dry and degrade. A hops pillow was not a folk remedy for sleeplessness. It was the delivery of a mild sedative through inhalation, and in a world where a person who could not sleep was a person who could not work. And a person who could not work was a person who might not survive the winter. Managing sleep was not a luxury. It was management of a critical resource. Rosemary, Rosmarinus officinalis, was used as a circulatory stimulant, as a memory aid, as an antimicrobial, and as a preservative for meat and fat. The rosmarinic acid in rosemary is a real antioxidant. The plant's use in preserving lard and tallow from rancidity was not culinary preference. It was practical food science, and in an era when rancid fat could be the difference between having enough calories to survive February and not having them, an herb that extended the shelf life of stored fat was worth more than its weight in something considerably more expensive. Meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, grew in damp meadows and along stream edges, and its salicylate content, related structurally to aspirin, gave it genuine analgesic and fever-reducing properties. Oh, it was used for headache, for joint pain, for fever. Felix Hoffmann, when he synthesized acetyl salicylic acid in the 19th century, named it after Spirea, the old genus name for meadowsweet. The medieval body had been receiving a less refined version of the same compound for centuries before the chemists caught up. Pennyroyal Menthopulagium must be spoken of honestly. It was used as an abortifacient because pulegone, its primary volatile compound, causes uterine contractions at sufficient concentrations. This use is dangerous. It caused deaths. It is included here not to recommend it, but because omitting it would be dishonest about what these plants were used for, and dishonesty about historical medicine is its own kind of disrespect. The women who used pennyroyal were not ignorant. They were making difficult decisions with the tools available to them, and the tools were genuinely pharmacologically active, and the risks were real and known. Cleavers, Galium aparine, the plant that sticks to your clothes as you walk through hedgerows in spring, was used as a lymphatic tonic and a treatment for skin conditions. The fresh plant was juiced and the liquid drunk. It has documented diuretic and mild anti-inflammatory properties. It grows everywhere you do not want it, which meant it was always there when you needed it. And then there is nettles, Urtica dioica, which should perhaps have been first on this list, because nettles were not medicine in the narrow sense. They were food, fiber, and pharmacy simultaneously. The iron content of nettle leaf is real and significant. The histamine in the sting, deliberately applied through urtication, the practice of beating arthritic joints with fresh nettles produced genuine counter-irritant analgesia through local histamine response. The fiber in the stem, when retted and processed, produced a thread fine enough to weave. The seeds, high in essential fatty acids, were nutritional supplements in the most literal sense. These plants did not save everyone. They were not a system without failures. Children died of infections that a modern antibiotic would resolve in 3 days. People died of pain that could now be managed with a standard prescription. The physics garden was not a solution. It was a negotiation, a running argument with illness and injury and cold and hunger, conducted by people who had no other leverage. The garden is gone now. The beds are grass. But the plants themselves are still there, in the hedgerows, at the field margins, in the compacted edges of footpaths and farm tracks, growing exactly where they always grew, in the same soils, under the same rain, producing the same compounds they always produced, entirely indifferent to whether anyone remembers what they are for.